This video is about the first half of chapter 3, namely public goods, and after this one we will discuss externalities. So the whole benchmark model of chapter 2 was about private goods. Private goods, we didn't say what the characteristics were, but private goods have two characteristics, namely rival in consumption and excludable. Rival in consumption means if I eat part of a cookie, then that part is not available to you. I mean, we can divide the cookie into parts, but once I have consumed something, it's not available for the next person to consume. Excludable means usually in the marketplace, if you don't buy the good, if you don't pay for it, you are excluded from consuming it. Not everyone can drive a luxury BMW, but only those who can afford one. So rivalry in consumption is usually about, well, it's always about private goods, such as the looting we had in KZN. This is just a picture from Chicago that I found from the internet. So they also had looting recently. And you find that people loot private stores with private goods. You would never see that they run and steal part of the electricity towers or the public swimming pool or the public road and things like that. They loot private stores and get away with consumption goods as much as they can. And if the price system is not successful to exclude someone, then you have to take other measures, such as this is also from Chicago, how they would put boards up against the store so that people cannot come in and loot. So private goods and public goods are opposites of each other in this sense of rivalry and excludability. The cookie is rival in consumption. If once I have eaten a part, then that's not available for you. And unless I pay the price of a cookie, I don't get it, usually. While public goods is non-rival in consumption. We don't have to fight for the defense of the country. Once our military service is defending us in a war or so, then everybody is defended. And we don't have to fight for the defense. If you sit in a class, you don't have to fight for a part of the lecture. You get the whole lecture, and the next person next to you also gets the whole lecture. So there's definitely non-rivalry in consumption. Usually a public good can also not be excluded. So how would the government defend the country and exclude some people from the defense? If it were possible to exclude non-taxpayers, they would have liked to do that, but they can't do that. So once the government erects a street light, for example, which is a public good, then everybody driving by gets the benefit of that street light. Then we get mixed goods. So a public road could be non-excludable in the sense that you don't have to pay to go on a public road. But it could be rival in consumption if it becomes congested. Then you have to fight for your little space. On a weekend, Friday, if you want to drive north from Pretoria, or on a Sunday back from Limpopo, then you will realize that there is rivalry in consumption of the N1 highway. But it's excludable in the sense that it's now a toll road, but a public road, the alternative road, is non-excludable. Then a mixed good could also be non-rival in consumption and excludable, such as I've just mentioned the toll road. But let's say as a public swimming pool is excludable. If you don't pay the entrance fee, you are excluded. Or if you don't wear the right clothing, you may be excluded from the consumption of the pool. But a big pool like that will to a large extent be non-rival in consumption. Everybody has the whole pool to his or her advantage. Now, a private good, for a private good, the market demand curve is the horizontal addition of the individual demand curves. Price is given, so consumers are price takers, and at a specific price we can see how much person B will demand from his demand curve, and we can see how much person J will demand from her demand curve, and then the horizontal sum of the quantities. So person B consumes OB of it, person J consumes OJ at that price, and then the sum is OQ for the market quantity. And this is the supply curve or the marginal cost curve. So price is at the red dot is equal to marginal cost, but it's also equal to the marginal utility of B, which is that amount, and it's also equal to the marginal utility of J, which is that amount. Now, I don't know if you remember what does marginal mean. Marginal cost means, for example, this point on the marginal, that's the marginal cost of producing the last unit, the bth unit. This is the marginal cost, we read it off from the vertical axis, of producing the jth unit. This is the marginal cost of producing the qth unit, so it becomes more and more expensive to produce more and more. But the marginal utility, we read off from the demand curve, so the extra utility of producing the bth unit is that amount. The extra utility for person J of producing the jth amount is, of consuming the jth amount is that, and the marginal utility of consuming the final commodity is that. So the equilibrium is where price is equal to marginal cost and also equal to each person's marginal utility. While for the public goods, the market demand curve is the vertical summation of individual, because now consumers are quantity takers. The government doesn't charge a price for a pure public good. So let's think of street lights. You don't have to pay for this street light. I mean, you may pay property taxes, but the municipality just provides street lights from their general budget. So they decide on a quantity of street lights. So we are now quantity takers. We have to take the number of street lights that they provide. And then each of us gets a specific utility from that. I may get a little utility from the street lights in the street. The neighbor may get some more utility from the same street lights. And the sum of all persons living in the street gets so much utility from the last street light provided. And therefore the cost, the equilibrium condition at E is that the price of the street light, or the marginal cost of producing another street light, is equal to the sum of the marginal utilities, not like private goods where it's equal to each person's marginal utility. So you can imagine that it's difficult for the government to determine the marginal utilities of consumers. There's a nice table 3.1 which you can have a clear look at. It's a nice way of asking the question to compare public and private goods. But the question is, who should be providing the public goods? And the general consensus is that it's the government's job. But since they are unable to determine all of our marginal utilities, it's really difficult or impossible for them to provide the optimal amount of public goods. This is true everywhere in the world. So governments try to provide good public services and goods and enough, but they don't succeed. They usually don't have enough money, they don't have the right information about our needs and so on. So governments also fail in the provision of public goods and services. I could ask you a question like this. Is education a public good or a private good? Or is something else a public or a private good? Then you have to test it to these two criteria, excludability and rivalry in consumption. So is education excludable? The idea is that primary and high school education is not excludable in the sense that if parents cannot afford to pay the school fees, then the school fees are waived. So everybody is included in basic education. But higher education, like university education, is excluded. Some people are excluded. If you don't make the matric results that are required, then you're not allowed into the system. Or if you want to study for a doctor, there are just so many places, or a veterinary surgeon, then there are scarce spaces available for students. So many are excluded, either through not being able to pay the fees, or which is not a general problem because money is quite readily available for students to study. But is education rival in consumption? And in general, it's not. This lecture, for example, is available to everybody. The whole lecture is not like a cookie. We don't have to divide the lecture into 380 parts and each one of you just gets a little section. You get the whole lecture. So it's not a rival in consumption in general. A primary school class, if the teacher teaches math, the whole class gets the full lecture. They don't have to fight for a piece of it. And so it's a mixed good. And we call it a merit good because it's good for society. Education is good by itself, but it also has lots of spin-off effects, which we will talk about later. And that's why we think the government should be providing education. So in the next video, I will continue with externalities.